Please, while we are waiting for Dr. Sania to join in, I'll just give you a quick of a snapshot because there are other participants who are here and also the panelists. So UNDP this year is working on a National Human Development Report on inequality. The work started last year and we have finalized most of the content of the report. It's just that in the final stages of some latest data released by the government with regards to PSLM and the COVID-19 outbreak. So we were just updating our analysis in that context. But other than that, the draft is more or less ready and we are more into dissemination, advocacy, generating the dialogue on NHDR. So while we were discussing this, I believe in the context of inequality, social protection, both in the context of inequality, but also most recently in the context of COVID-19 was one of the primary topics that we thought merits discussion among stakeholders. We were discussing this idea with Dr. Sania Nishtar and proposed why not have a policy dialogue on with different sort of stakeholders on board, just to see what's the overall environment of social protection in Pakistan, how various stakeholders are contributing to it. And that's the reason why we have this diverse panel with us, including Gazdar Saab, who is the advisor to the Chief Minister in Sindh, Ingrid, who heads the ILO and with a heavy portfolio on social protection. She's also the chair of Outcome 10 group on social protection, UN Outcome 10 group on social protection. We have with us Mustafa Talpur, who again is an inequality expert on the topic of inequality and working for Oxfam International. He's also one of our members of the Advisory Council on the National Human Development Report. We also invited Safiya Aftab, who has done some work with ILO and UNDP on social protection, but in general is an expert on issues of social protection, inequality in general. So other than that, we have for this discussion today, we also have we got some services considering that we are working on a topic of inequality. We have an interpreter who is translating this session in sign language. So welcome, Dr. Sania. We were just giving a brief introduction to this discussion. I hope you can hear us.
I can hear you. Assalamualaikum, everybody, and I can hear you very well, Umar.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sania, I just started with a brief introduction of the panelists. We have all the panelists on board, and thank you for accepting our invitation to moderate and to be the guest at this discussion session on inequality and social protection. Basically, I was just explaining the panelists and the participants that this session is being organized as part of our National Human Development Report, which on this year is on the theme of inequality. But the issue of social protection is more pertinent, especially in the current context of COVID-19, where, one of the critical recommendations from the government has been through, addressing COVID-19 through a very a concrete social protection program under SAS. So with this, background, I've just introduced our panelists. We have Mustafa Talpur Saab, Safiya Aftab Saiba, Ingrid from ILO, Gazdar Saab from Sindh, and we are also doing sign language of this conversation as well for the benefit of the audience. So with this brief introduction, I would like you, if you can present your opening remarks and any inputs that you have to kick off the discussion today.
So, good day and assalamu alaikum everybody. I can see lots of friends on the screen. And I want to begin by thanking UNDP for this very timely conversation. Because social protection as it relates to inequality, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and the very protracted emergency that it proposes is a very topical discussion, both in terms of what's underway and also in terms of what we need to plan and execute in the months ahead. Of course, all of you are very knowledgeable and know about the theory. So I thought perhaps as a government representative, I can talk to you a little about what SAS is, its broader framework, and then talk a little bit about SAS emergency cash. And then I thought we could use that as a peg to open the conversation around some of the broader questions that are on the table and some of the broader questions that where I can benefit from your expertise. So is that all right with you, Umar?
Yes, Dr. Sania, please proceed.
Okay. So I just want to next. So you will all recall that in May 2019, we embarked on the ESAS journey. ESAS is a multi-sectoral poverty alleviation and social protection program. The Prime Minister announced its policy, then we came out with the strategy, we articulated the goals, an implementation plan was created, and the MNE framework was developed. The entire bundle of interventions under ESAS, and you would recall that there were more than 134 interventions, policies, and programs, were all linked by theory of change. And you would recall, many of you have peer-reviewed this strategy, and you would recall that we were then talking about 7 time-bound outcome-based goals. These were nicely aligned under technical pillars. We had clarity on what kind of policies and programs were inputting into that. And then a range of cross-cutting partnerships were forged and continue to be shaped as a contribution towards the broader premise of ESAS. Just to set the context, because I said just a moment ago that ESAS is whole of government, it's multi-sectoral, it's multifaceted. It comprises of more than 134 elements. Right at the very outset, we begin segregating roles and responsibilities. So there were responsibilities of federal ministries, of provincial departments, and then PAST is the acronym for the Poverty Alleviation and Social Safety Ministry, which I have the honor of leading. So they were execution responsibilities which were broadly social protection related that fell under our rubric. We color-coded them, and I want to quickly skim through the next couple of slides to demonstrate how those 134 elements also shape up in a different classification. So here you can see that there are 4 ESAS pillars, and those actions shape under them in a different way. Looked at from another perspective, you can also envisage how those different policies, programs, and elements impact different target audiences, and there are 14 target audiences that are envisaged in ESAS. Many of you would recall from those conversations, those consultations at that time, that we had a pretty concrete plan of what we were offering to provinces and what we were asking them to do, because ESAS was both federal and provincial. We of course have the prerogative to shepherd it overall, and and in my role as the Minister for Poverty Alleviation, I have the mandate to execute. But there is a much bigger ESAS, and with 134 elements and 34 executing agencies. This slide just shows you a very visual depiction of the diversity of the programs, and this was pre-COVID. When COVID struck, we were looking at a very different scenario. So I just want to backtrack to the setting of late February 2020. And in late February 2020, whatever we were doing, whatever we were planning, whatever we were executing, we really had to halt, and we had to take stock of the then situation. And the then situation was that the COVID-19 lockdowns, which were of course a requirement at that time, were impacting 24 million individuals. These are individuals who were self-employed in the informal economy. These were daily wages, these were piece rate earners. And before we commenced ESAS Emergency Cash, which is what I'll spend the next 5 minutes on, we were actually looking at a situation of civil unrest in the country. I recall many people would tell me that we want to distribute rations, and we fill our car up to take rations. but we are attacked by people because there's so many people who are out of job. It was a very, very dire situation at that time. So whatever we were doing with SARS prior to February 2019 had to go on the back burner, and we were tasked to do something very quickly, and we designed a project and executed it, which came to be known as SARS emergency cash. Now, the lessons from, we started with evidence, and the lessons from international experience were that cash is much better than rations and vouchers because the benefits the indirect market benefits are much higher. And those were the learnings from a meta-analysis that was conducted. So we embarked upon designing a cash program, an emergency cash program. We leveraged the existing SARS infrastructure for emergency cash. Luckily, there were three elements of a backbone that we had developed, all three of them in 2019, which significantly came into play. Number one, we had procured a new biometric payment system in 2019. Number two, a demand-side SMS and web-based desk registration system had been developed for Pakistan's social protection operations. And we drew elements from that to design SARS emergency cash. And thirdly, we had designed a new wealth profiling data analytics mechanism based on which we had exited 0.8 million individuals from Pakistan's social protection list. So we kind of knitted together these three things and designed what then came to be known as SARS emergency cash. Several cycles of approvals of projects, several proposals going to ECC, to the cabinet. Finally, today I had the pleasure of announcing on behalf of the government an hour ago in a press conference that we are now looking at almost 17 million families in the first round of SARS cash. In total, we have an envelope of 203 billion. And that this package impacts 110 million individuals. This is half of Pakistan. This is huge and massive. It's the largest social protection program ever launched in the history of the country. And arguably, it's the biggest, the fastest, the most transparent, and the most rule-based amongst the developing countries in the post-COVID situation. I'm deeply humbled to have played a small part, and I remain thankful to all my colleagues, to all our partners who helped it execute it on the ground. I just want to give you a sense of the kind of environment we were operating in. I mean, when we were going into operations, this was a time of lockdown. Article 144 of our penal code was in effect. The spread of the virus was a real threat. So we systematically took measures against these risks. We staggered payments in particular. We created special campsites where we could enforce social distancing measures. Our partner banks were given special instructions to ensure precautionary measures. The third risk was that provincial discordance in schemes could have created space for collusion because of conflicting messages. So the provinces were envisaging schemes of 4,000, of 3,000, and we had to rally them together to create a unified payment, a unified cash operation to minimize duplication, and that by itself was quite a challenge. And in hindsight, because we were able to signal to them that we will provide a level playing field to all provinces, and that this will be strictly rule and based and apolitical, that we were able to garner that support. We massively advertised, and we put together an 8171 short code SMS messaging service through which we solicited applications. And what we put out there was very, very simple. People were asked to send their ID card numbers to us on the 8171 SMS short code. We received 139 million applications through that. But after removing the duplications, we had 61 million applications after removing duplications. Finally, we accepted 16.9 and the rest were rejected based on family duplication, wealth profiling and government service status. I'm not going to walk you through this slide because a report is coming out on Assas Emergency Cash within the next week, and this is one plate from that report. The report will outline the methodology, the execution strategy, the experiences of real-time evaluation in great and granular detail. But this is just to kind of whet your appetite, to let you know that there were we divided Assas Cash, the ecosystem of 16.9 into 5 categories. And that the report will outline its description, the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, the number of beneficiaries in each category, whether we were following population shares or not, province-wise, what was the gender distribution and where the funds came from. I just want to outline at this stage that category 1 were the former, so these were the regular beneficiaries of Kafalat. And the Kafalat list includes those individuals who were previously supported by BISP, out of which we had exited 0.8 million based on wealth profiling. So category 1, to put it simply, category 1 were old beneficiaries, but the rest of the category 2, 3, 4, and 5 were new beneficiaries. And the number of new beneficiaries was about 12 million. So it was truly very huge. Selected attributes of the program, it was rule-based, no space for human discretion, transparency-driven, totally apolitical, and I will show you evidence of this. There was a wider aspiration centered on massively upscaling social protection in the country, embedded within the design. And then of course, this was also a gateway to digital and financial inclusion. The rule-based nature is also highlighted quite in detail in the report that is going to come out shortly this week. In that report, we've explained how the SMS-triggered messages hit different databases and how automated messages were triggered at every step of the way. Secondly, I want to emphasize that this was also an unprecedented, by government standards, this was, the transparency we provided was quite unprecedented. We put a public portal out there with details of all the Assas Emergency Cash, provincial and district, I beg your pardon, provincial, district and tehsil-wise distribution in terms of the number of beneficiaries, in terms of the amount that was dispersed, and we embedded a search engine in that information engine. So you could select a province, you could select see how many accounts were being credited, because we were making payments through bank accounts. So the dashboard would give you details on how many bank accounts were being credited, how many beneficiaries had withdrawn money, and how much money still remained there. So if you look at the landscape of federally funded Assas Emergency Cash, you will see that Sindh gains the most. The population share of Sindh is 22.45%, but its share in Assas Cash is 31%. Conversely, Punjab's population share, according to the 2017 census, is 51%, and its share in Assas Cash is 43%. I'm going to spend a minute on the stagger bar chart to explain to you that the stagger bar chart on the extreme left represents the overall all categories. But the two stagger bars in the middle show the distribution in category 2 and 3 according to population, which is what was approved by the ECC and the cabinet. But we figured out that we had a spillover list from the new category, which is depicted in the extreme right. And in that category, Sindh had the largest share. In category 4, Sindh also had the largest share. And the government decided that everybody who's eligible should be supported, irrespective of provincial shares. So we went back on our earlier decision of boxing percentages into population. What I'm trying to explain to you is that despite the fact that, that irrespective of politics, the principle was that we should ensure that the maximum number of all the eligible individuals benefit, which basically is evidence of the apolitical nature of the operations. In terms of describing the key attributes of the program, the SAS payment model includes not just a limited mandate account from which the beneficiaries draw money, but also a savings wallet. And now going forward, the priority for us is to invest in financial literacy so that people, the 16.9 million individuals who have come in our ecosystem, can activate their savings wallets and learn how to transact through that. So SAS Emergency Cash has also laid the groundwork for deeper financial and digital inclusion in the future. And for those of you who are familiar with our strategy, you will recall that our initial target of financial and digital inclusion was 7 million, but now it has been increased to 16.9. Very quickly, lessons from real-time evaluation. I mean, SAS Emergency Cash for myself and my colleagues was a very emotionally charged. We saw that there was immense suffering on the ground, that we were responsible for executing this massive program in a context of a lockdown, in a context where there was uncertainty about there were people desperate, people were on the verge of hunger. So all the time, we were all on the field all the time. We were constantly running the operations and we were constantly learning and refining. And this figure basically gives you a snapshot of what we learned and how we refined our operations. There's a lot of in-depth detail in the report that you will see in 1B. For instance, we found out that poor people don't have credit on their phones. So we made the SMS service free. To my surprise, I found out that a lot of people who own phones do not know how to SMS. So we, made calls to volunteers to assist them. As was expected, there were limitations of data-driven messaging. So there were notifications to dead beneficiaries. If their relatives, if a daughter messaged us that she needed assistance, our database would track the daughter's father or the daughter's mother. And if they were eligible, the daughter would get a message, oh, your mother is eligible, she will be getting the money. But if the mother was dead, how do you deal with that? So we had to develop a workaround for this. Expired CNICs, we have to waive off that conditionality. We had to create special incentives for banks and retailers to work in that very difficult environment. So the advance income tax on the commission of the retailers had to be waived off through the cabinet. The provinces had to waive off the sales tax. We were trying to, I see many economists on the screen, and you will understand that we were trying to build an incentive for people to work with us in that very difficult environment, even if it meant waiving off a tax and letting them make more money if that meant if that was what would drive them to serve poor people in this very dire situation. Then, of course, we were constantly under cyber attacks, so there were layers and layers of vigilance we had to exercise. There were, because of the large volume of cash, there were deductions by unscrupulous retailers who were always a risk. So, the security agencies on ground were mobilized, lots of FIRs and people arrested and punitive action. Then the biometric payment failure for first-time beneficiaries and how we had to do another workaround with bank branches getting mobilized. Still, a number of people, more than 1 million people who are eligible, still haven't shown up at cash points. So we developed a dashboard for us and advertised. What I'm trying to explain to you is that a massive effort was put in terms of real-time evaluation. And here you see a few messages, a few illustrations of that. So this is the personalized message that now goes out to people who suffered from biometric failure once. Here you will see the notices that have gone out publicly to encourage people with notifications to get beneficiaries to send applications so that we can assign the next of kin. Here you see the portal which we widely publicize so that people can now check their status and go and collect their payment, because we now have to close this round of payment. We have to do the reconciliations and close our books. So we are keen. So this is my last slide. And I just want to spend a minute on what we have learned by doing the SARS emergency cash. And I think to begin with, and to be a bit self-reflective, the know-how in designing and implementing this massive national program in a context of complexity and uncertainty in real time and with speed is something that we'd like to share. And hence, every day I go back after a day of operations, I sit and I try to outline that in a report, which hopefully we will see next week. The difficulty of the context also forced us to do things in a very different way. Within the context of SARS, I see that the government is more agile, more data-driven, more experimental, more ambitious, and more willing to do things out of the box. For instance, I would.
We lost Dr. Sania.
Yes, I believe that's the case. Let's wait for some time for her to get connected. But I believe she was on her last slide anyways. So Momina, can you please check with her office? She's back on now. Dr. Sania, we can hear you.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard?
You were on the last slide, I believe, the last slide you were presenting.
Okay, so in the last slide, I was explaining to you what we have learned, and I was explaining that this is a massive national program, and that we learned how to operate in a context of complexity and uncertainty. I had explained that this has changed the way the government works to the extent of my ministry is concerned. I was explaining that we've been forced to adapt and embrace digital ways of working. And I was sharing with you that we have set up new whole of government coordination platforms. Also, in terms of the lessons learned, we have learned the importance of financial literacy, and going forward, we will be heavily investing in it. Because in this day and age where digital tools provide you with a number of different mechanisms to reach out to people and to serve them, financial literacy is the very is the very basic backbone through which you do that. Also, this experience is really going to help us in executing the great global reimagination of social welfare which was envisaged in SARS. And finally, I think that uh, there are lessons for other countries. I'm sure that we can learn from what other countries are doing, but there are insights from what we've done which can also inform experiences elsewhere. For example, if a country has a unique personal identification system, then there are ways in which to combine that with mobile phones, with biometrics, with internet connectivity, and cell phone coverage to deliver similar programs. So I think I will stop at that. And just to share with you that it was an enormous privilege to serve the people of this country. And I'm very proud of our teams and our partners who helped to execute this. So very happy to listen to your views and
Thank you, Dr. Sania. Again, good introduction to the discussion. We already have colleagues posting questions on the question and answer box, but we may take these questions right at the end. Maybe if we can proceed with a moderated discussion with other panelists. We have already shared with them a set of questions that we would like them to address. You posing those questions to them, but in general, if colleagues can add on based on their experience and understanding while answering those questions, it would also be helpful for the participants to listen to. Dr. Sania, over to you, being a moderator for this session.
okay, so we have we have four very experienced panelists, and I want to thank them for joining the panel. Maybe we can go to Mr. Mustafa Talpur first. And Mustafa, I'd like to invite you for your reflections on SARS emergency cash, and I'd like you in particular to talk a little bit about social protection and inequality and how they're linked together. Because social protection, as you know, is about reducing poverty and vulnerability through policies and programs, by diminishing people's exposure to risks and enhancing their capacity to protect themselves. And a lot of us believe that social protection has a deep interplay with inequality. So based on your work and based on your civil society insights, how do you see this? How do you see the two linking together?
Thank you, Dr. Sania, and thank you, UNDP, for organizing this very timely webinar during the COVID crisis, and when we are working on the Human Development Report that talks on the inequality. And I also personally appreciate the leadership of Dr. Nishtar, that she has really provided a lot of energy into the social protection program and brought transparency, improved its targets. I believe this government during this COVID has really introduced some very progressive policies. And it has been throughout the history when major crises hit the countries, governments have been forced to take care of the people. So either world wars or the other pandemics. So this is, of course, is a crisis. It's a very difficult time for everybody, but it also offers an opportunity. So I think the two things that government have done, we all have to work together, that the public policy really doesn't reverse on those key two expenditures. So one is increased public expenditure on the health system. That has been historically ignored in Pakistan over the decades. And this current surge of expenditure in public health is really a progressive step and has to be continued. And second, of course, is this one-time cash grant, but also other comprehensive elements into it that Dr. Sania has mentioned, to the labor and health and many other programs. So I think with this background, uh, we in Oxfam worked like since last 6-7 years on the major economic inequality crisis in the world, and we believe that economic inequality and climate change are the two major development challenges of our generation. And reducing inequality is important for development because it has adverse impact on poverty eradication as well. And both these are the key for the sustainable development goals that the world leaders have agreed. Reducing inequality, I believe there is a lot of evidence. I will quote you few from the Asia that we did a research. That requires a strong social protection system. Alongside, I would emphasize with fair taxation and labor market policies. So in isolation, the cash transfers may not bring that social objectives that we are thinking to reduce inequality. I will come back to, on that later. But I think at the policy making level, social protection is the most powerful tool that governments have and to reduce inequality and vulnerability and poverty if it is targeted properly and implemented with a transparency. So when we talk about inequality, we usually see two forms of inequality. One, of course, is the inequality of outcome, where there's a huge differences of income between different groups of people, geographical groups, or men and women. But the other important area, of course, is the inequality of opportunity, where people do not have equal access to education, to healthcare, to nutrition. And comprehensive social protection programs, when well designed and I think transparently implemented uh, and well governed, can help in reducing both forms of inequality in the gap between income and wealth, but also the opportunities. Just I want to to share this one slide to show um, do I have right to share slide?
You,
Yes,
Mustafa,
please go
Yeah,
ahead.
I hope can you see that?
Yes, yes, we
So
can.
you can see the level of global economic inequality. So every year Oxfam produces this global statistics and report during the World Economic Forum in Davos. And this year in 2020 January, we had a theme for the care economy. So it's a time to care, and it's mainly targeted to see how the unpaid and underpaid care work that mostly women do has the implications on the inequality. But just give you a quick figures. So only 2,153 people in 2019 have more wealth between them than 4.6 billion people on the earth. Only 2,153 people. And only 22 richest men uh, have more wealth than all the women in the Africa continent. So this is the level of inequality that we have been talking for. How can the inequality? Let's go on the slide. As coming to the Dr. Sania's question, how social protection helps in inequality reduction? So, as I said, it's an essential pillar of redistributive policies. When you take the money from those who have more and you redistribute to those who don't have much. But more than that, I think social protection programs, if it is universal in its nature, can transform societies really, not just reducing inequality dramatically, but also creating more caring and egalitarian societies. But if designed with carefully and with gender lens, social protection program can also make a very substantial contribution to the gender inequality and the empowerment of the women. Um, and it has to be based on the solidarity, not the charity. I mean, the previous programs that in the Pakistan we had in the 80s and 90s, basically based on the charity kind of thing. And when the poor people get some cash grants, and that helps to smoothen their consumption, that has been in fluctuation due to many reasons of crop failure, job loss, sickness, old age, and many other reasons. Uh, and you see countries like Pakistan, where every day we have a discussion that how many people are in poverty, what percentage, and that also becomes political, playing with the numbers and the percentages. Because I believe uh, not really having the strong statistical basis, but people literally little, I mean, with very little margin graduate from poverty, and then one medical bill, just one medical bill can bring them back to the in the line of the poverty. So the social protection, if there's guaranteed the health, that people can withstand these economic and health shocks, and the shocks that natural disasters bring, are these calamities, and like the COVID. Uh, there's also an evidence that if if the household income increases and that money really if goes into the hands of the woman, it has a larger impact of reducing inequality of opportunity, and mostly it's invested in nutrition, child nutrition, education, and welfare, and old age welfare. These are the forms where actually inequality mushrooms and increases. And one of the factor that we have seen in Asia, the mostly the inequality is explained by larger differences between the labor income. So the technology premium that people are taking. So the active labor market policies such as training to workers, and but many more comprehensive social protection programs such as sick pay leave. Now, I mean, these all the areas have been in discussion since couple of decades, but the COVID has brought this back. So there weren't in many countries there were not paid sick leaves, there weren't paid maternity leaves, um, there weren't disability payments and allowances. So the active labor market policies could really help to reduce inequality. And then of course the cash transfers, health insurance have transformational impact on women, as I said. Uh, Imagine current women's engagement in informal work without minimum pay. So recently we just did a brief on the informal work in Asia. 2/3 of the labor force in Asia is engaged with informal work, and majority of them are women. Without all these benefits that I mentioned, no insurance, hardly any have a contract, no pension, no maternity leave. So, so just imagine if these benefits are provided through social protection, this may revolutionize the labor market for women, and this changing very structural causes of gender inequality. A very quick 3 examples. So last year we produced a book that I edited, and we had 8 country examples. So just quoting 3 from Korea, China, and Indonesia. So China's rural cash transfer, they started in 2007 under their China Rural Minimum Living Standard Guarantee Program, what they called it a DABO. By 17 in 10 years, it reached to 40 million people, with average transfer rose from 466 yuan to 4,300. But most important is the in 2013 they evaluated it, and data shows that this program, along with other social protection programs, have reduced market income gini by 13% in 10 years. Similarly, in Korea, they have a basic old age pension that now covers 70% of the old age citizen, as aging is becoming a problem in Korea. And they started this benefit by $93. that now it's $241, but their aim is to reach by $290 in 2021. Again, when they looked its impact, it reduced inequality by 9.8% overall. And then, I mean, many other programs, but this specific program was responsible for 2.1% decrease in income Gini. And Indonesia has a kind of a different program. What they call PKH, conditional cash transfer, was linked with health and education outcomes. And the evaluation that World Bank did, they found that the health and education outcomes both have improved in the through those programs. Just a quick note: in 2012, Asian Development Bank did the social protection index. Now they call it indicator. And there's a one myth that countries who are poor, they cannot invest in social protection. If you see this table, it's actually a political decision. So it doesn't depend on your per capita income. So for example, Uzbekistan in 2012 have a per capita income of 1,710, but they were spending 9.9% of GDP on social protection. While if you see Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, they were spending less with high per capita income. So this was the case with, I just compared Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. You see, Pakistan and Bangladesh, Pakistan has the higher per capita at that time in 2012 than Nepal and Bangladesh, but Pakistan's spending on social protection was less. So it's actually the issue of priority, how the countries prioritize. This is my last slide on quick thoughts on how do we move forward. So as I already said, I think we have to keep up this momentum that government have started on this. I mean, build on that. So keep investing on the public health sector and this cash grant. But as I said, targeted cash transfer is a good effort, and it's a very good effort in this current time, but may not be enough to achieve the desired goals. And the aim should be higher, gradually moving to the universal basic income, as the ILO social protection floors guide us. And I think Pakistan has moved quite a far in social protection, starting from Zakat, Betel Mal to BISP to now SAs. But we still need to have a comprehensive social protection floor. It's still an kind of a different assortment of bits and pieces and different implementation agencies. It has to be somewhere at an umbrella organization where these things converge and plan together. And it has to be implemented collectively and owned by all the provincial governments, federal government, but also we see a bigger role of the private sector where the people are employed. So that the labor market policies mainly through them. And I think this needs to be designed in conjunction with other policies wherever we have looked. So the conditional or non-conditional cash transfers have brought more impact when it is implemented with other social spending, mainly on health and education. So this social spending on education, health, and social protection go hand in hand in reducing inequality. As I said already, because it's the issue of inequality of opportunity in countries like Pakistan, where kids can't go to the school, or the nutrition issue, or the one medical bill brings back to them into the poverty. And then I believe gender-friendly labor market policies, the role of private sector is very critical to not only implementing minimum wage, but thinking through to moving to a living wage and training and skill enhancement. And then also the macroeconomic framework in which we work. For example, if we very sincerely and transparently provide a cash grant, but if one policy is struck that increases 10% food inflation, then that 500 or 1,000 increase in this grant to women really doesn't matter because they're at the same level. And similarly, the indirect taxation that Dr. Sania was mentioning as well. So the sales tax on the food and other essentials that poor people spend, again, actually neutralizes the benefit that people have through the social protection cash grants and others. So this has to be, when I say comprehensive, means these has to be worked together. So the macroeconomic policies shouldn't cancel the benefits of the social protection program. So it's not giving in one pocket and taking out from other pockets wouldn't help. And then I think in countries like Pakistan, where in many countries in Asia where the labor force is informally engaged, it's a very difficult task to civil registration, to really register the people, where people are now engaged in the home-based work, in individual work, vendors, home-based women workers. So that's difficult but very important task to have the kind of, we can have a map of the cities, areas, rural areas where there are pockets of these people. And who are these people? The women, the old age, the disabled. I remember Dr. Sania showed us one of this graph where that is the consideration. And that data is transparently available so the people can comment and look into that. And I mean, I will leave it. The big question is, what is the adequate finance level of social protection? What is the UN calling over 5-6% of GDP? And how do we finance it? So these are the major questions that I think we have to collectively think through. So I will stop here. Thanks for the careful listening.
Thank you very much, Mustafa Saab. That's very insightful, and a number of excellent points were made. I think we should stay with the same vein. The subject of the linkage of social protection and its potential to reduce inequalities. You mentioned the labor market perspective and how it interplays into this, and I think this is a good segue to go to Ingrid and to get your take on this. Ingrid, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Honorable Dr. Sania Nishtar, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, and other panelists and audience. Unfortunately, I cannot see who is on board, but I can see there are a number of on board. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to thank also the UNDP for organizing this event here. And I understand that this is part of the consultation towards the next Human Development Report. I'm obviously also very happy to see you again, Sania Nishtar, and I hope we will be able to see each other sort of physically in the not so long time. We also worked together with the other UN agencies, worked together last year, and both in terms of the ESAs, but also as from our part with the Masturka ESAs, and I know that this is on the brink to sort of come out. From the ILO perspective, as you will know, that the ILO is promoting decent work for all, and social protection is considered an integral part of decent work. And I think also that in this context here of the COVID-19, we have a particular, you can say, both a opportunity, but also almost a call on us to look at social protection more in depth. I think as the COVID-19 really reminds us of how important social protection is, also to avoid that people are pushed into poverty, or if they are pushed into poverty, at least they can sort of still survive, and so it's a very, very important thing. And therefore also social protection is part of the ILO policies, on suggested policies on the COVID. But the other thing is, of course, also, and I was extremely happy to hear and to learn about what all have been done under the ASAS and the experience you have from that. This is amazing. And so you can say the ESAs itself is also a very good opportunity. And I think both this and also as the crisis together highlights, again, as I said, the importance of social protection. And I cannot remember, and I cannot let go just to mention as in the late 90s when the financial crisis hit Asia, there were a number of countries, I think Korea, Thailand, etc., that realized that, oh, this is not, we need to do something about social protection so that when we have these crises, be it because of, you can say, as a natural disasters, but also financial crisis, which was the one they had in the late 90s. But this time, the health crisis, and we have low cost in these countries, we have flooding sometimes, so that when we have these crises, that it doesn't mean that people cannot feed their family, cannot send their children to school, or are pushed down in poverty. So we really need to prevent that such things do happen. And that's where also general social protection come in. So of course, social protection is not a replacement for employment, but employment and social protection go hand in hand and of course social protection is important for at all levels. I think there were that the previous slide also explains how we see it from the ILO perspective, that it is at all level, it is at the whole life cycle. It is something like essential healthcare, access to that includes it. But it's also about children. Now I say here, enjoy basic income security. We are obviously not promoting child labor, but it means that the children, or those who take care of them rather, do have access to provide their kids with proper nutrition, education, care, and whatever else they need. Because our children, this is the future of a society. And then of course, all of us who work, it's fine when we can work, but occasionally we cannot, maybe because we are sick, maybe because we get unemployed, maybe because that, and that's where the crisis come in, because that there is no more work to get, and or maternity or disability, etc. So this is basically to replace income when work cannot be performed. And then all of us, at least if we live long enough, we reach a stage where we cannot any longer work, and therefore we need some basic income security also at the elder stage. So basically these are the 4 guarantees that are highlighted in the recommendations on the social protection floors from 2012, number 202. You can look it up yourself. So if I then go to the next one. Okay. So from our perspective, as we believe that social protection programs can indeed go a long way and are very helpful also to address inequality if they are proper designed, if they are proper managed, and of course also financed, because otherwise it doesn't work out. And that links to different aspects. One is as information about what it is, reaching out to those people that it is intended to, the selection process, enrollment, many of these social protection schemes, at least some of them, is like insurance, that if you are not insured beforehand, it's very difficult to get on board afterwards. I know for some of the you can say the unconditional cash transfer, yes, there you can, because it is in the interest of a society to also ensure that even the poorest people are protected. And then of course identification of beneficiaries. Who are they? Where are they? How can they be reached? And I think what you are explaining in terms of the ESAs is extremely useful. How to do that actually, and what are the lessons learned. And I congratulate you that you also talk about those things that maybe need a little bit of adjustment, that's very, very encouraging. And then there is the benefit delivery, how to do that also in a transparent way, and using, for instance, the banking system, etc. And as all systems also need, you can say ways to handle grievances, because there will be some in between that maybe when it was assessed, it looked like one thing, but then it appeared actually to be something else. They were poorer than it was expected, and they are then complaining, why did I not get? Or my neighbor got, I didn't get, why that? Or I have an employment injury benefit, I cannot work, but is it 40% or is it 60%? So there are these are of course also needs to be done. And then of course that I would say maybe one of the very, very important one, and that links to also the whole issue of, I mean, can a country afford it? And I very much agree with also the previous speaker saying that as a social protection is not only, or it's not about as what the country, as a how much, what the GDP is, etc. The ILO's own as a statistic, what I call reports and studies, and I remember from when the recommendation in 2012 was made, really illustrates that all countries, even the poorest, as those that have the least financial resources available, can afford a minimum level of social protection floors, and also that it does make sense, because as no country, there's not much point in having the poorest of all poor people, because they don't have any purchasing power. They are hungry, they are not healthy, they cannot be productive, etc. So it should be in the interest of all countries to also have a healthy workforce, a healthy population, etc. And so the minimum social protection floors would seem affordable and indispensable for all countries. Then comes the question about when we sort of move up the ladder, also how are they financed? And that's here where countries need to look at also as a taxation, because the most advanced countries, you can say the most advanced countries in terms of social protection, there is also a taxation issue, as where some of the finances are created there, maybe a progressive taxation, so those that earn most are also paying most. And then there is other, and this is very much linked to also to some of them when you come to the labor market, that they are contributory schemes where both employers and sometimes also workers are contributing to it. That, for instance, apply to pension, but also apply to employment injury benefits, etc. And then there's the whole issue of private-public partnerships, and there can be other, of course, other means of creating funds, and you can say much of when I'm talking about this here, I also talk about social protection more in general. I'm not talking about it particularly after a crisis, because after a crisis, there might also be a need for some additional cash, and that can only be through grants or whatever it means. It can be of philanthropy, etc. So, okay, the next one. Yes. And there's a little bit what I've already, as I talked about here, that as at least that the basic one that you can see with one, which is the non-contributory scheme, and typically for the poor. And then we also see, and you have that in most countries have some kind of that, not necessarily all. Actually, a study from a few years back showed that only in Asia Pacific, only about 38% had access to at least one social protection contingency. But that means that almost 2/3 that doesn't have. But then traditionally, we have seen also a number in the formal economy. But what is often missing is this kind of what we call the middle portion. And typically maybe sort of the upper informal economy, as there where there are money enough, but when a shock hit, they are really, they cannot withstand it. So it is about also closing these gaps. And this here a little bit, I won't go into that, you can read about it, but as a shows a little bit how much more we have to do. The protection gap is relatively large, and not least also in as a developing countries. And this was the one I mentioned, that if you compare, it's a bit of a catching up. If you compare to some of the other, even the world, Asia is a little bit behind the world in terms of at least access to one social protection contingency. So next. And here sort of as what we are also looking at in terms of seen from also with a labor market perspective on it. Health protection is important, and that is important in this context here. It's important for the population, but it's certainly also important for the labor market, because if the labor market, if people are sick or cannot work or are not productive, then there is no also income as such, both for businesses but also for the people itself. And then, of course, the income security, which is also very much talked about much here in terms of the COVID, both in two terms, generally to reduce poverty, vulnerability, and inequalities, but certainly also in this context here to facilitate that people can actually go into quarantine and stay there. They don't have to all go out and work, because then there is a much bigger risk for spreading, and then also facilitate the return to work, which may be at a lesser scale than they are used to. Then, of course, the job and asset protection. How can we use social protection to also ensure that jobs can be protected? In some countries, also during the COVID, the governments have gone in and said, well, okay, we support the private sector so that we can maintain the jobs, and hopefully have so that once the crisis is over or lowered, then the business can start immediately again, and workers are there to do their job. So some countries have gone in and have provided extra support to the salaries, etc., or at least some of the salaries, so that to protect the jobs and also protect the businesses. And then, of course, the last one is facilitate a faster recovery, because if people don't have any money, they're not spending anything. That means that the local retailer is not earning anything. That means that the producer and manufacturer is not earning anything, nor is the transporter. So actually, it is typically in the society's interest to also have cash injection, make sure that people have cash so they can spend. And this year I will also leave you can go in and see. This is a little bit about the policy advice that came out from our headquarters and from the ILO in terms of the COVID and the social protection. And here is a sort of a calculator also to see what can we afford, how can we actually create fiscal space for social protection. So yeah, I think that is joined and this is we are doing some in the outcome 10, and I know that we are discussing also how can we link a little bit more, coordinate better with also the ESA's program. Also, when Julian Arnaise is back, we will look at that. So we are looking at, among others, supporting the government to develop a strong needs-based social protection framework, strengthen and expand access to social protection mechanisms, fostering innovative solutions to strengthen the existing schemes, both in terms of reaching out, adequacy, and as a benefit, you can say suitability, actually, advocating for universal health care, insurance schemes, and linked to that also the birth registration, SNCC, etc., to also ensure that we know what is the target group. And I just want also, when I saw this one, one of the things that we are looking at and promoting in all countries is what we call universal social protection. Means social protection to basically available to everybody, of course, depending on different needs, but that social protection is universal. Some may need a little of this and some may need that, but there is access for everybody. Then there is, of course, also the coordination between the different schemes, and that's very important also as for the effectiveness. Promoting integrated approaches, assisting government efforts to generate disaggregated data. We are doing that, supporting the analysis, monitoring, and evaluation of the social protection policies program, and then providing information and policy advice on current international debates around social protection. And as you know, the ILO is working with the government, but we are equally working with the employers and workers, and that is, of course, because also when we talk about social protection, their contribution, their voice, and their engagement is very important. So I think with that, I will leave it here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ingrid, for very comprehensively going over a number of different, very important normative aspects related to social protection. So I think between Mustafa and between Ingrid, we covered the theoretical ground very well. I think there's a very compelling case that has been made for the importance of social protection and for the need to for countries to squarely invest in this. And I think in a post-COVID situation, in this protracted emergency, the importance of this cannot be overemphasized. So perhaps with this as a background, we can now go to our colleague Haris Gazdar in Sindh, because I think it's very important to get a provincial perspective on the table. Of course, the role of the federal government is to assist provinces with social protection interventions and programs, but social protection is principally a provincial responsibility in our federal polity. So I think we can significantly benefit from hearing a provincial perspective on this matter. You have the floor, Haris.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity. I think that it's very encouraging that we are having this debate, interest and presence with respect to social protection. I will say a little bit about our lessons with respect to social protection programming in Pakistan, where we think the next steps have to be. And I think it's in that context that I will talk a little bit about provincial priorities. And then finally, I will say a little bit about what we've learned with respect to the COVID response. And I think most of what I have to say is, in fact, everything that I have to say is constructive. To start, I think that we had a major breakthrough in Pakistan about 10 years ago, when there was a paradigm shift with respect to social protection program. And that was with the Benazir Income Support Program. There were, I think, 4 elements. We've written about that in academic work, and there's been a lot of debate. But let me just remind ourselves as to what that achievement was, but not from the perspective of patting ourselves on the back. I think that I want to record what our achievement was, and then to move on to what the challenges are in the future. So the first achievement was scale. That Pakistan decided that it will get into the social protection business on a big scale. So prior to that, we had Zakat, Baitul Mal, a number of fragmented schemes, and we went to scale. The second thing is, which is institutionally very, very important, and something which now, after 10 years, we've begun to almost accept as part of the architecture of any program in Pakistan, but still not quite. And that was targeting of a universe. So Mustafa Talpur Sahab has talked about universal basic income, and Ingrid has also talked a little bit about that. But even when you have targeted programs, the question is that, are you targeting of a universe? So if you're targeting of a universe, then at the base of it is some kinds of a right-based idea that every citizen has an equal chance of being part of a program, given the conditions and the policies and the priorities of the government at that point. So targeting of a universe was a major breakthrough, major achievement, and An important, a very significant element within that was that there was a breakthrough with respect to outreach. So prior to that, we had a serious problem of reaching out to the bottom quintile. So a lot of the programs would basically benefit people who were slightly higher up because they had somewhat more access to the administrative system. But in this one, we had a methodology of going to the doorstep. So whether or not we succeeded, and there are people on this panel who are experienced, who know that history quite well. But the fact is that an attempt was made to go to the doorstep. The third is, of course, women beneficiaries. Until then, it was the norm for men to be beneficiaries. And the fourth very significant paradigm shift was that it was legislative. So we had a legislative cover, an act of parliament which was passed unanimously without opposition. So those were our achievements as Pakistan, maybe about 9 or 10 years ago, maybe longer, perhaps 12 years ago. And since then, so we set up a big challenge for ourselves. I think the minimum we had to do after that, after achieving that, was to at least update the database which was generated through which we were going to target people. Right? So the database had come about as a result of a poverty scorecard census, which I think concluded in 2010. Safiya Aftab is here, and she and I worked on the process evaluation, so there are lots of details there. But a renewal was supposed to happen in 4 years' time, and I don't think that it has happened yet. I think that there are attempts at renewing it. I think we hear about a national socioeconomic registry, the new data, but we have not been able to use it. At least Dr. Sania's presentation doesn't indicate that we were able to use it in the COVID response. That was the minimum we had to do, just to keep things going.
Sorry to interrupt, but the details, as I said, are in the report, which is forthcoming this week.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It's not very clear.
Yeah, you were saying that you did not get anything about how the database is leveraged. So I was just explaining that the technical report that is coming out is going to have the details.
Okay, that's good. That was the minimum we had to do. What was the maximum we had to do, or what we had to achieve somewhere in between? So I think that really depends on our perspectives and our priorities and where we want to go. And that's the question which we're asking today also. I think that some of us have talked about going towards universal basic income. At the minimum, I think we wanted to move towards a rights-based social protection system which was comprehensive. So from being a one-shot static social registry, we had to move towards a dynamic social registry, which would pay great attention to the vulnerabilities of people down to the detailed level. So now that we had established our ability to do a static registry, we had to move on to build a dynamic registry. That is actually a conclusion that we came to in the Sindh government. It was also a conclusion that was shared with us by the government of Punjab when they came up with their own comment on the COVID response, their RISE Punjab document. If you ask me, and if you ask about the political priorities or the policy priorities of the Sindh government, I would say that yes, rights-based approach to social protection, one that ultimately links it to social insurance, so that we are no longer, looking around. We're no longer in a situation where, when the next crisis comes, to say that we have millions of workers in the informal sector. Informality is basically a function of regulation, and it's also a function of government functions, right? So if a social registry begins to recognize people and start recording them at their workplace and starts linking that data with their workplace data, we've already started going down the path of de-informalizing them. And I think that's where we have to go. We want, and we still do, we need to link people with broader social policy priorities and agendas. So we have interventions in health and education, for the elderly, for the disabled, and a lot of things going on both at the federal level, mostly now at the provincial level, because most of the, as you know, most of the social policy work is done in the provincial level after the 18th Amendment. So this is really our vision. This is where we have to go. And that's really where we in the Sindh government were headed. before COVID, we had decided to construct a social registry, of course, to work very, very closely with the BISP or SAS or whatever you want to call it, but basically with the federal government's effort, because we own that. We very strongly own that because we believe in social protection. So very, 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 very strongly own the federal government's system and its intervention. We validate its results as far as we can. We would like to use that, have a great deal of cooperation and great deal of synergy with respect to data sharing and other priorities. But we came to a conclusion which was arrived at by the Punjab government maybe about, I guess, 5 years ago. Punjab legislated a provincial social protection authority, and we're about to go the same way, not as a rival to the BISPSRs, but as a complement to, because there's a lot of work, there are a lot of priorities, there are a lot of issues that the provincial government will have to handle, and it does handle, where it will need the support and the cooperation of the federal government, but it will also have to pursue a number of things on its own. Now, the COVID response, I think that we had a genuine, it's a very genuine case study, and it's really not an issue of, saying who is right or who is wrong, but it's actually a very, very classic example of when you can have a genuine difference of opinion, and it can have implications for your social protection response. Now, Dr. Sania mentioned that the COVID response and the emergency cash, and we can go into the details of that, but actually the big picture is the more important. The federal government always saw the lockdown as the main economic shock, as the main adverse shock, right? And they are entitled to that opinion. The world is divided at the moment between these two different opinions. There are some people who believe that the pandemic itself poses a major threat to the economy, and there is a different perspective. It says that pandemic containment measures are the ones that pose a major threat. Now, there's a huge overlap between these two perspectives, but there is a difference which is important to understand. That difference in perspective is really, I think, what defines our understanding of the limitations of the system that we already had at the moment. Right? So we very much appreciate the fact that a lot of people, a lot of citizens of Pakistan who reside in our province got the BISPSR's cash support. But we also are very concerned that our strategy, our government strategy and our government's responsibility, the provincial government's responsibility with respect to health and disease containment. So both these things were provincial subjects, law and order and health. We were very focused on a social protection response that will aid us with respect to disease containment. We fully respect a different point of view, which sees the lockdown itself as a major socioeconomic threat. That's fine, but that was not our view. That's all I'm trying to say. So it was not our view. If our view had prevailed, if we had our own social registry, then contrary actually to much of the history of social protection programming in Pakistan and Sindh, we would have focused efforts in the high density, low income areas of Karachi. And we actually, I can tell you this on this forum, that we actually won the political battle in Sindh government for that. What prevented us from actually implementing that? Buying a lockdown. Literally, we wanted to buy a lockdown. So we wanted to provide cash to people in the low income areas of Karachi to basically pacify them for long enough for a lockdown to be successful. We failed in that, I can tell you that. There are many, many important reasons for that failure. And I don't want to, I can get into that failure is a collective failure. It's a failure of our government, it's a failure of our effort. It's also a failure of the support that we got from the federal government, but it's not finger pointing. It's basically a lesson learned. So the lesson that we learned was that there will always be issues that require a localized response, a response that is very, very nuanced, a response that is in line with our very specific understanding. And that understanding is extremely dynamic. So if you ask me about the situation today, the Sindh government presented a budget, and it passed a budget in the Sindh Assembly passed a budget where we are not yet looking at a post-COVID situation in the coming fiscal year. So unlike our peers and colleagues in other governments, we don't think that 2021 fiscal year is entirely a post-COVID year. We pray that it is, but we are not planning on it being a post-COVID year. So we think that the disease will continue. We think that its impact on families who are going to lose income earners, families who are going to lose non-income earners, families who are going to make a lot of expenditures on health, people will continue to be laid off. So there will be lots of issues, and there might still be some adverse effects of the lockdown. Right? So just imagine that the lockdown now recedes into background as a third most important impact of COVID. Right? The disease itself has a major social protection impact, and the global economic recession, which affects our economy, has a major impact. The third one is, maybe another general lockdown or a smart lockdown. So all of those will also have an impact. So we are preparing for those eventualities, and we are preparing for a very, very quick, very flexible and adaptive response. And in that, we are seeking help and cooperation of all the federal government organizations, of our colleagues in VISP, SAS, NADRA, Pakistan Telecommunications Authority. All of these organizations hold data that we would like to have. And of course, all the donor partners who've been very, very actively involved. So we come out of the situation in this last few months' experience by understanding, having some confidence about the ability of Pakistan to manage crises. And that ability is a historical one, and we have to keep building upon that. So we have shown the ability and resilience, and also we know what the challenges are. So we have some ideas about what the challenges are, and we want to basically address them in partnership with all of our colleagues. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for listening.
So thank you. It's I completely concur that we need to work together. It's social protection, of course, is a provincial mandate, but the federal government is ready to assist all provinces. And as we've demonstrated in SAS emergency cash, there are some things about politics. That's how we see it in the poverty alleviation division. I completely agree with you that we perhaps are not in a post-COVID situation, which is why I use the word and said that COVID is a protracted emergency. We do not know what kind of a popcorn effect we are going to continue to see. We've just had a spike after, Eid al-Fitr, and which has reiterated the importance of social distancing measures. So I think we need to be prepared for other such events, which reiterates the importance of social protection all the more. So and very much look forward to working collaboratively. Just a little clarification, respectfully. VISP and SAS are not synonymous. VISP is an executing agency, and I'm currently the chair of VISP. It's a very important organization. It's one of the 34 executing agencies of SAS. SAS is 34 executing agencies, and 7 out of the 134 mandates, 7 out of the 134 mandates of SAS are executed out of VISP. SAS emergency cash was and is executed out of VISP, but SAS is a framework of welfare. It's much larger than VISP, but VISP is and will continue to remain a very important organization. Thank you, Haris, for your very important comments. Let us now go to Safiya. Safiya is a very able economist. She works in the private sector now, and I'd really be interested in seeing what her perspectives are on the whole situation. As you know, there was a proactive effort to engage the private sector in our entire cash operations were not done through the treasury banks. They were not done through National Bank and Bank of Punjab. We competitively hired 2 commercial entities and saved a lot of money in that process to execute SAS cash. and it was the retailers on ground that we incentivized to work with us. So the role of the private sector going forward in a whole of government scenario, in a context where all entities, all stakeholders need to capitalize on their comparative advantages, is a requirement for this situation, for this protracted emergency. So what are your perspectives, Safiya? How do you see it from somebody sitting in the private sector space?
Thank you. Well, technically, I sit in the private sector space, but my work on social policy is more in terms of policy analysis and research. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to come at it from that perspective. I'd just like to say two things over here. Firstly, I think I agree with the Mustafa Talpur Saab that this situation in some sense was an opportunity. I think BISP is a very important program because it actually put social protection on the map in Pakistan in a way that it had never featured before in Pakistan's policy landscape. So that was very important. And it's very commendable that BISP sort of paved the way, but it's very commendable that this government took the social protection field forward with SARS, and as you're saying, they've expanded the concept of social protection to include much more besides BISP. So other than BISP, there are a lot of programs now in SARS which are being taken forward through a unified entity, I assume. That's all positive. However, I think that as time has gone on in the COVID emergency, what's happened is that initially the response was very, social protection centered. So we were seeing a lot of the social protection response was sort of front and center when we started off. And then somewhere along the line, it almost seemed as though the federal government, was backing off from that, and it became all about reviving the economy. And there has been discussion in this panel also about how there's not necessarily a dichotomy there. Basically, the economy will not revive unless public health is taken care of and protection is provided to the most vulnerable. Because it's a simple economic issue, when the most vulnerable or when large sections of your population do not have spending power, there's no way that the economy will revive. So actually, the public health perspective was always, was always probably one of the most important things or the most important thing. And I don't understand why lately, there has been this sort of divide in the response, as if reviving the economy is entirely separate from social protection. So a lot of the very good work that you have done and that has been done under SARS, in a sense, it has there's fear of it being diluted, because it will become a case of, well, yes, they were implementing a social protection program, but we have to really revive the economy first. So I think we have to be careful not to do that. Social protection will pretty well be the first line of defense in this situation, because the government has to show that it is interested in preserving life and maintaining public health. These are the government's fundamental rules, and it's important that this is kept as a priority. So that's one thing. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is, perhaps not now, but perhaps whenever a post-COVID world appears, which may not be for another year or maybe beyond that, it is important to look at social protection then in a wider perspective, not just as an emergency response. Because really, when we think of it as social protection for just a small number of people, the vulnerable, those whom we can target, I think we sort of miss out. We miss out too many groups and too many stakeholders. I think the ILO, Ingrid explained the ILO's perspective, and there's a lot to be said for the universal approach to social protection. Your own experience, I think, in SARS shows that targeting is very much it's fraught. Basically, it's a fraught activity. It took you a considerable amount of time, and you had to face a considerable amount of criticism when you cleaned up your lists. And those lists, it was not surprising that they had to be cleaned up, because the list is 10 years old. And it's expensive, and it's quite an administrative exercise to create a new registry every time. I have been looking at some of the work being done under the NSER, the latest survey that was being done, and the administrative complications, as you know better than I do, are tremendous. So, you know, it's quite a job to update a registry even after a decade. And one really needs to see whether, you know, in the longer run, it is worth the time and effort to do that, or perhaps switch to another way of looking at things, which may be just to provide a functioning universal healthcare system, which actually is usable for the vast majority of people. And these are debates that, you know, need to go ahead in Pakistan, perhaps, you know, when the emergency is over, whenever it is over. I think there's no substitute for a long run, you know, a move towards a welfare state in the longer run. But I think certain debates do need to begin. Meanwhile, let's keep the focus on social protection to the extent possible, and make sure that people understand that it is not an either or a dichotomy. Social protection has to be provided if the economy is to be revived. I think it's important to put that message out, and I think SARS is the best, you know, vehicle to put that message out. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Safiya, and let me assure you that the federal government is not dropping the ball on social protection at all. Today at a press conference I announced about 2 hours ago that the budget for the first round of SARS cash, emergency cash, has been increased from 144 billion to 203 billion, and the number of people covered is being increased from 12, the original mandate of 12 million to almost 17 million. So this is a huge jump. This was a very fresh decision, cabinet decision. And of course, the Prime Minister will soon announce another round of emergency cash very soon. On your point about having a wider lens for social protection, of course, you're absolutely right. SARS emergency cash is just meant as a which are all embracing, and we were incrementally in the process of rolling them out. And of course, then COVID struck and things had to be put. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Dr. Sania, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I was, we temporarily lost the connection, but I wanted to say that your point about the not boxing social protection into emergency is very valid, and that's exactly what the case is. We have a comprehensive strategy, a SARS strategy. We were in the midst of rolling it out. I'm sure you know that we rolled out the interest-free loan program, the asset transfer program, the SARS scholarships, the SARS nutrition initiative to prevent stunting is going to be inaugurated later this month. It was scheduled for inauguration in March 2020, and the Wasila Talim program, which has been ongoing for the last 10 years, is a very good program. We're upscaling that to the entire country. So there is a comprehensive focus on all the different elements. It's just that for the last 6 months, look, for the last 5 months, we have been doing little other than SARS emergency cash. So other things we have to revise the timelines. With that, we come to the end of our very learned panel. I think we had a diversity of feedback from an independent social policy perspective, from a provincial perspective, from an international agency perspective, and from the civil society perspective, and that has really enriched the conversation. The importance of social protection and the importance of long-term investment in social protection has been reiterated all along, and its interlinkage with inequality is something that is really being emphasized. We have another 15 minutes, so Umar, if there are any questions that you have in your communication trail, perhaps you can outline them and we can triage them to whichever colleague it's directed at, either the 4 panelists or myself. We're happy All five
Thank you, Sania. Thank you. Quite a diversified set of questions. And first, I would like to thank you and the esteemed panelists for a very informative discussion. I've been attending these webinars quite a lot these days, but this was really a very informative and well organized. Not well organized. I shouldn't be saying that, but a very well discussed panel. But just on the questions, there are 16 of them, quite diversified. So let me just split them into three halves so that either yourself or the panelist could answer those. The first question is on maybe some sort of geographical diversification. So there was a colleague from a merged district who was saying how the cash disbursement and health cards are being implemented in merged district areas. And specifically, the concerns are more in terms of the utilization of these telecommunication companies, with one telecom companies being selected while others who might have a higher outreach in merged areas not there. The other question is on farmers. I might not use the right word because the question I just wrote down the questions. But how does the farmers concerns being addressed under SARS program? Is there a specific program for in the agriculture sector that addresses to farmers' need? So that's the second question. The third question is basically linked to skills development in employability. So basically sustenance of SARS program. How is the graduation of from SARS cash transfer program to developing employable skills is a question that somebody posed. Maybe Ingrid could answer that, or Dr. Sania. The fifth question is on private sector and job loss in the private sector, where people who own some assets are not beneficiaries of either the SARS program, or maybe this question is more in the context of COVID-19. So they are missing on receiving government support, but they are the ones whose jobs are being affected during COVID-19. So any program or policies to support those who have some assets in their name, but are not being benefited from.
Omar, can I answer those, because these are all questions for me, so I quickly.
Sure,
I don't trust my handwriting, so I scribbled, but okay. So on the area of geographic diversification in the merged districts, if you go to our information portal, which is pass.gov.pk on the right-hand corner, click on the information portal, and the information portal will pop up. You can search, select government of a KP, put the name of your merged districts, and you will have granular details. Other than North and South Waziristan, where the 2011 survey was not done because of the law and order situation. And as you will read in the report, because we were using the registry for verification of the 817 incoming stream, you will see that there are no beneficiaries in category 1, there are no beneficiaries in category 2 for North and South Waziristan. But in other categories, you will see beneficiaries for North and South Waziristan as well. Otherwise, so that is the only hole. Otherwise, you will see the decile-wise breakdown in the merged districts, and all details are available on the information portal on pass.gov.pk. The role of telecom companies, they provide the connectivity infrastructure. We do not contract them. Our partner banks that are under contractual arrangements leverage their bandwidth. The second question was about the farmers' concerns. When you look at when you thumb through the SR strategy, there is a specific component on that in which plans for rolling out the agriculture value chain matching grant projects is outlined. That is one of the 3 SRs initiatives that are yet to be rolled out. On the skills development question, this is a broader question about SRs, as was the question about the farmers' concerns. You will see that in the SRs theory of change, we've outlined which category of individuals require cash grants, to commercial banks, microfinance banks. So they were, and in fact, can you hear me?
The voice was breaking in between, but yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, so the answer to the question about skill development is outlined in the SAS tariff change and in the SAS strategy, where we describe how the different programs are to target different potential beneficiary groups. Regarding your question about job loss, I think this is a question related to the COVID situation. When we opened the 817 scheme, anybody that had experienced a job loss was invited to apply. But then we realized that that people should be facilitated further. So we opened a web portal on the Prime Minister's website because the funds that he was raising himself, he wanted to commit specifically to those who had lost their jobs. So through that, what was called the SAS labor portal, we solicited applications and we got 4.8 million. And on that declaration, they had to give their last employer, their last income, when they were laid off, etc., etc. So 1.27 million individuals in the SAS cash ecosystem of 16.9 were actually those whose applications had come through the SAS portal and who, had gone past all the features. Over.
So I'll move on to the next set of questions. There are a few that are linked to COVID-19. So I'll just post this first and then to move to more this set of questions. One is on digital transformation, issues of registration through digital means. So the question is, does poor households and the real poor have access to these digital tools to get themselves registered for cash programs? The second is more in terms of the use of SAS program or the data that we have in terms of the National Socioeconomic Registry, how acquainted it is to identify the vulnerable people, especially in the context of catastrophes such as COVID-19.
Okay, so regarding your question about poor households and access to digital data, so the digital capability that was brought into play at the users or the requesters end was just a simple phone with an SMS feature. So people were asked to SMS their identity card numbers, nothing else. I mean, I've been to the field extensively and I've seen that there are places where people don't have electricity. But they have rugged, small telephones which cost 2,000 rupees. And a lot of people tell me that they actually listen to the radio. So you will recall that when the COVID was at its peak, I used to do a radio program every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, wearing my public health hat, talking about the importance of hand washing and social distancing. But then I started using that platform to tell them about 8171, here is how you would send. So to answer that person's question, the digital capability we used at the requester's end was very basic. It was just SMS and sending the identity card number. There was no other way to do this. Secondly, the question about data and identifying the vulnerable population.
Is it my connection that is lost this time?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Dr. Sania.
Okay, so what I was trying to explain was the second question was data and the identification of the vulnerable individuals. There was one of the slides in which I had demonstrated how an incoming SMS would hit different databases and different messages would be generated, and details about that. are forthcoming in the report, which will be released shortly. Over to you, Umar.
Thank you, Dr. Sania. Just one more question in the same note. On COVID-19, there was there's a question on migrant workers who were either who lost their jobs outside Pakistan and now returning to Pakistan. So any particular program in that context to benefit those, and also for people who were who had job contracts outside Pakistan, but because of travel restrictions could not move outside. So any particular programs under EHSAS that could benefit these vulnerable people?
So I know that a proposal is currently under preparation by the Ministries of Overseas Pakistanis. And as soon as they give us the proposal, it will be taken to the cabinet for approval. And if it is approved, we will give them the cash transfers as per policy.
Okay, Dr. Sani, there are two interesting questions that are personally of interest to me, and those are more like not only interest to you, but to other panelists as well. So one question that a colleague answered, it was partially answered by another, by Dr. Harris as well. But in general, they were asking one is these social protection programs, they are okay, but how in terms of inequality, how does they help to reduce inequality in the sense that unless accompanied by taxation programs to redistribute wealth from the better off quintiles to the poorer quintiles? So is there any taxation policy that is accompanied under these social protection programs that help finance these programs, but also in addition help reduce the inequality, so transferring from the rich to the poor?
So in the finance bill, there was a proactive effort to ensure that the burden of taxation falls the least on those who are from the most disadvantaged segments of the population. Hello, can you hear me?
We lost your voice in between, but now we can hear you.
Yes, over to you.
Okay, the second question that from a human development perspective now is, while EHSAS do address social protection concerns, but in general, are there any upstream policy interventions by the government that help to reduce these vulnerabilities in the early life cycle of the people, early life cycle of the people, so they don't fall into the poverty trap at the upfront rather than being dependent on social protection programs at the later stages of their life?
So as you know, human development is not, there's a facet of human development that social protection can address, but human development, there are many actors and sectors interplaying in the human development landscape, and we have an important but a limited role. So in terms of early childhood development, there are two programs that EHSAS has. One of them is a mother and child nutrition program, conditional cash transfer nutrition program using specialized nutrition food. We are opening 31 centers in 9 districts of the country, and the program will be inaugurated in the last week of July or the first week of August. That's one of the things we're doing. The idea is to upscale it. The outcome of interest is to reduce stunting in children. And again, the reduction of stunting is not just dependent on consumption of specialized nutrition food. There's interplay of immunization and water and sanitation and housing conditions. So very much multi-sectoral, but with my social protection implementation hat, just to, in terms of the response to your question, that's one of the things that's part of the EHSAS bucket. The other is the conditional cash transfer on education, which involves CCTs for primary schooling to reduce dropout rates, and that program is already rolling out in ongoing in 50 districts. We are expanding it to the entire country. So from a human development perspective, these are the two things that we execute, but in the EHSAS strategy, there are a number of different endpoints and a number of different indicators that other agencies have committed to deliver on.
Thank you. As we're reaching the end, there are two questions mostly on the governance aspect. One is in terms of geographical spread, like, the SAS is a federal program, but how is the coordination mechanism between federal and provinces managed? Do we have a formal mechanism of coordination? And the second is more about the vertical, there are multiple programs under SAS. So how are we managing the beneficiaries under one program when in others to avoid duplication or any other governance related issues in that context?
Before I answer this question of yours, I just want to go back to your earlier question because you talked about early childhood development. That's why I talked about the CCT primary education and the program on stunting. But otherwise, there are a suite of other programs centered on human development in the SAS bucket. You would know that we are now running the largest ever in the history of Pakistan need and merit-based undergraduate scholarship scheme, the SAS scholarship scheme. Last year we gave scholarships to 50,000 students, and this is going to be repeated. So just to let you know, human development is one of the 4 pillars of the SAS, and there are many programs under that. Your last question is about the federal government and the provinces. The chief secretaries are the focal persons of SAS, and we liaise with all the chief secretaries. In the slide deck, I also had a slide which outlined what do we offer to them and what are we asking them to do. And thirdly, because there's been so much mention of data, we have waived off, since I've taken over, I've waived off data charges for all the provinces. So any government entity wanting data from us is not going to be charged at all. And there are many other items of collaboration with us in the provinces. For example, we run Kafalat and SAS Cash, people in the provinces benefit. We run SAS scholarships, people in the provinces benefit. We run Bilasut Gazdar, people in the provinces benefit. We run the asset transfer scheme, it is all for the provinces. We open soup kitchens, those are on the provinces. There's very little on the federal capital territory. So whatever we are doing, it is for the provinces. It's done according to the provincial shares, and in many cases, and you have evidence that it's being done very apolitically. Your last question was about beneficiary duplication. We are proceeding to an ecosystem of one window operations where every federally funded entity will be mandated to check where the beneficiary is getting support from, and there will be a whole policy governing that. We will encourage the provinces to come in that ecosystem as well very shortly.
Thank you.
Before I hand over to you, but I also want to thank you for this excellent convening, for the wonderful arrangements, for the detail with which you engaged us. I really enjoyed talking to colleagues and to being part of this, and I want to thank you for inviting me, and I hope that this is going to be the beginning of many others that we do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sania. I think we have just run out of time as well. It's 6:30. Most of these questions have been addressed. We will be sharing the recording of these conversations with the participants and the panelists as well. So, they would be up along with the presentation. It has been shared by our esteemed panelists. I thank you, Dr. Sania, and the colleagues who joined us as the esteemed panelists for this session. This was a very thought-provoking and interesting discussion. I hope the attendees who are participants of this liked it. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation, the participants. And once again, thank you to the panelists for being at the session. We hope to continue this debate and discussion in future. Thank you and have a nice evening.